So Kant's theory is based on the belief that immorality is irrational and inconsistent. So therefore he came up with his ideal system, whose purpose is to weed out immoral, inconsistent actions from our human behavior. His system is also known as the categorical imperative. So in other words, one should always respect the humanity in others and should act only in accordance to the rules that are accountable for everyone. So this falls under what is known as Kantian agency, and this basically states that morality holds necessary for all rational beings, so that it is necessary and exceptionless. Furthermore, people are rational self-legislators who cannot deny the truth of morality. So in other words, Kant's agency is basically an individual who is able to make moral decisions based on their idea of what is right and what is wrong. And also they are to be held accountable for these actions that they make. So I agree with this statement because if one is able to think critically and is able to distinguish what is right from wrong, then they should be able to be held accountable for their actions. For example, a child old enough to understand what is right from what is wrong should be held accountable when hitting others. However, an infant that does not yet understand right from wrong because they are not able to critically think would not be able to understand the consequences of their behaviors. So the first formulation of the categorical imperative states that one should act only in accordance with the maxim that you can will without contradiction to become a universal law of nature. And a maxim is basically just a principle established prior to an action, and it takes the form of when I am in circumstances C, I am to do X. So this formulation basically just checks for consistency. If you will to do something, then it makes it right for everyone else to do the same. So although I agree with the basis of this statement, everyone has different beliefs and wills. So this would eventually lead or make up for some inconsistencies, as will is not necessarily universal. So the second formulation states that one should always act in such a way as to treat people, oneself and others, as an end in themselves and never as a mere means. So in other words, we should respect other people's status and be able to respect ourselves. However, in real life scenarios, this eventually becomes contradictory. So we often interact with others as a means and not to an end, to get something out of others, whether it's voluntarily or involuntarily, such as when you go to a doctor, you go for their care, whether they are voluntarily providing that care or involuntarily. And Kant determines what actions are good if they fall under the goodwill. The goodwill is one's will or want to do the right thing, and it is considered good in itself because it stems from good itself. So some motivations can be used for good or evil, but acting from the goodwill is the only way to become moral. For example, stealing because you're afraid, not stealing because you're afraid of being arrested is not good because it does not follow the goodwill. However, stealing because you're following your goodwill is genuinely good. So one objection to Kant is the problem of counterintuitive results. An example of this is the murder at the door scenario. If we were to follow Kant's reasonings and there was a murder at your door, we would have no choice but to tell him where the victim was hiding, if we knew where he was hiding. So this would be true because lying violates the second formulation of the categorical imperative. This objection also led to Kant's response of contradictions of conception and will. In his response, he doesn't see you telling the murderer as a weakness, rather as a strength. He said that moral actions don't gain worth from an anticipated consequence, but rather from lack of contradiction. By lying in this scenario, it would lead to an inconsistency of duty and therefore contradiction. He also says that since it is too hard to be able to predict consequences, basing moral worth on these predictions only leads to contradictions. Furthermore, he says that at the end of the day, only you can control your own behavior and will. I, however, do not agree with this statement, as I do not believe that consequences are too difficult to predict. Like if a murderer is at your door, it's logical to believe that he is going to kill the victim that is hiding at your house. And by lying to the murderer, you are doing it out of your own goodwill because you're trying to save the person, since your intentions are good to save the victim. Another objection is the problem of specification. His rules are very broad in general, and it really comes down to one's own will and moral rules, which then creates a space for contradictions. So for question 2, I chose the utilitarianism question. So utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory. This basically just means that the moral status of an action is only judged by the consequences of that action. Furthermore, utilitarianism states that the best action is that action that brings out the greatest balance of happiness over unhappiness. In this theory, everyone's happiness is equally considered, and therefore it determines what is good and what actions are right by whichever action brings out the most equal balance. And there are 4 main points of utilitarianism, and the second one states that the moral worth or utility of an action is quantifiable via the hedonic calculus. So the hedonic calculator basically just gives people a way to visualize their own happiness or pleasure. And this is basically used when we weigh out our pros and cons in everyday life. However, it is unreliable since there is numbers on which to base off of. For example, as stated in the lecture, some people may use a scale of -10 to 10, while others may use a scale of -100 to 100, and etc. Also, the values that one gives in this hedonic calculator are subjective. For example, someone may say that doing homework has a consequence of -3, while another person may say that doing homework has a consequence of +6. So since there is no set range of numbers and it is subjective, it does not make the hedonic calculator universal and therefore unreliable. So one objection is that it doesn't account for right or justice. For example, the trolley example was given in the lecture, and it essentially just asks people to choose between a train that is going down track 1, which has 5 people laying down, or between a track 2 that is going down and there's 1 person laying down. So according to non-utilitarian morality, there are certain rules that one should never violate, such as do not kill. However, it presents a problem for utilitarianism, since utilitarianism maximizes well-being for the greatest number of people. Saving the lives of 5 outweigh the life of 1, even though this means causing death upon someone. So killing the 1 person would be universally considered immoral, but under utilitarianism, there is that exception. So one response from utilitarianism to this dilemma would be to bite the bullet. So in this response, we would accept that we should kill the 1 person despite it being considered wrong. Although it seems wrong to kill 1 person, this allows for 5 other people with equal importance to continue living. So the second objection is that it doesn't recognize special obligations. So in the real world, impartiality is important within certain contexts, such as in judges, doctors, and government officials. However, utilitarianism does not allow for certain obligations or for special obligations. It states that all individuals are always deserving of equal consideration. And this becomes a problem because in everyday life, we usually prioritize our friends and family over strangers, such as a parent prioritizing the needs of their own children. And in utilitarianism, however, a parent would be thought to neglect their own children in order to save a certain number of strangers. And a response to this objection is that all values have a utilitarian basis. So the theory cannot make sense of some of the values we consider most important, such as special obligations and loving our children. It is not incompatible with common sense, rather it justifies the common sense values that we hold.